Hi everyone, it's Aunt Frenita. Today's story is called God Wins. The memory verse is from 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 6. It says, "Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving." Today's message is God gives me the victory. I just can't do it. Have you ever felt that way? When things are too hard, whom do you ask for help? Jonathan knew who to ask. Here's his story. King Saul's army was camped under a tree near Gibeah. The Philistines were camped nearby in a narrow pass in the mountains. Every day, the Philistines sent out soldiers to harm the Israelites and to steal from them. The Philistines had hundreds of chariots and thousands of well-armed soldiers. The Israelite army of 600 men was small and afraid. None of the Israelite soldiers had swords or spears. Only Saul and Jonathan had them. The Israelite soldiers had plows, hoes, axes, and sickles for weapons. But you don't win wars with farm tools. Because of this, many of the Israelite soldiers were afraid, so they hid in holes and behind rocks. But not Jonathan, the son of King Saul. He alone thought that God could win the battle. One day, Jonathan whispered to the soldier who carried his heavy shield, "Come with me." The armor-bearer knew at once that Jonathan had a secret plan. He quickly dressed and followed Jonathan out of the camp. Nobody heard them leave. "We can get to the Philistine lookout if we take the pass between the mountains," Jonathan explained. "God will get us past the guards and give us victory. Nothing can stop God from saving us." "You lead the way," the armor-bearer said. "I'll be right behind you." "Let's go," Jonathan said, starting down the pass. "If, when they see us, they tell us to wait for them to come down, we will wait. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' we know that this is a sign that the Lord will give us a victory." After a slow, hard hike, Jonathan and his armor-bearer reached the pass. Boldly, they stepped forward in full view of the Philistine guards. "Look," one of the guards cried out. "The Israelites are crawling out of their holes." "Come on up so we can teach you a lesson," another shouted. "That's our sign," Jonathan whispered. "God has given them into our hands." So the two began climbing up that steep cliff. When they got to the top, Jonathan walked forward. His armor-bearer was right behind him. 20 Philistine guards suddenly attacked in just a small space. But Jonathan and his armor-bearer knew God would help them. The Philistines were quickly defeated. Other guards watching from the tops of the cliffs panicked and became confused when they saw what happened. They shouted down to tell the soldiers in the Philistine camp, and then those soldiers panicked. Even the chariot drivers panicked. In their confusion, they began to push and fight one another as they ran in every direction. The ground shook as if a great army with horsemen and chariots were coming. Jonathan, his armor-bearer, and the Philistines knew that God was helping Israel. When King Saul and his 600 soldiers came upon the scene, Jonathan and his armor-bearer stood quietly watching the Philistines run away. The soldiers of Israel knew they had won because God had won the battle for them. "This day the Lord has rescued us," they said. Jonathan and his armor-bearer agreed. The Lord had won a great victory. Nothing had stopped God from saving them. Today's story is called The Lion and the Bear. The memory verse is from Psalm chapter 23, verses 1 and 2. "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures." Today's message is I can't save myself. Jesus saves me. When he had to write a report about sheep, Jamie remembered something his mother had read to him from the Bible. This is what he recalled. David looked over the flock of sheep that dotted the field. These woolly animals were his friends, and he was their shepherd. He walked with the sheep by the still pools of the water in the heat of the day. He led them to the green fields of grass. He was usually by himself, but David did not feel afraid or alone. He knew that God was with him. Just as David took good care of the sheep, God, his shepherd, was taking special care of him. "I must stay alert," David reminded himself when he felt like napping. "A little lamb might stray from the flock while I sleep." To keep himself awake, he often sat on a high rock and strummed softly on the harp he carried with him. Then, in a clear voice, he sang, "The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing." One day, David saw a movement out of the corner of his eye. He dropped his harp and grabbed his sling. He always carried smooth, round stones, ready for anything that might try to hurt the sheep. A lion crouched in a thicket at the edge of the water. Just as the huge lion was ready to spring on a sheep, David released the stone. Zing! The stone flew through the air and hit the lion. Then David fought the lion until he knew the lion could no longer hurt the sheep. Quickly, David laid down his sling and walked among the sheep, counting them carefully. They were all there, and none were hurt. The Lord had helped him protect the sheep. Soon David sat on his rock again, playing his harp. This time he sang, "Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Another day, David decided to lead the sheep into the hills. Here the sheep could graze on new grass, but danger lurked in the hills. Bears lived in dens in the hillsides and often wandered out searching for food. David carefully watched the lambs. Suddenly he saw something move in the tall grass nearby. Instantly he was alert. A huge brown beast moved in the grass near the lambs. Suddenly it rushed forward. Quickly, David loaded his sling, swung it, and let it go. The stone hit the bear so hard that it fell and never got up again. Once more, God had helped David save his sheep. That evening, as David led the sheep home, he might have sung, "Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Like the sheep, we need someone to watch over us. We need Jesus, the Good Shepherd. We can't save ourselves, but Jesus can. Only Jesus saves us.
God wins again. The message is, when God wins, we are winners. This week, our memory verse is, "Surely goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever." Psalm 23, verse 6. I won! Mikhail shouted. I made the final point. His teammates frowned and turned away. Recess was over. It was time for Bible class. Here's the story they studied. What do you think Mikhail might have learned? David and his 600 men marched from the city of Ziklag to help Achish, the Philistine king, fight a battle. But the Philistine princes would not let David and his men help, so they had to turn around and march all the way back to Ziklag. As Ziklag appeared in the distance, the men were shocked to see the smoke rising. While they were gone, the Amalekites had attacked and burned their city to the ground. Their wives, children, and cattle were all gone. All that was left was smoke and ashes. It's all your fault, David, the men accused. You should have left soldiers here to take care of our families. David was upset too. He had lost some of his own family. Now the men were blaming him. What should he do? David's first thought was to turn to God. He knew God would show him what to do. Bring the ephod, he told Abiathar the priest. Shall we go after the Amalekites? David asked the Lord. Will we reach them and get our families back? The ephod had 2 large gemstones on it. When the priest asked a question of God, one of the stones would glow as if the answer was yes. And that is what happened. Go, the priest said. You will reach them and get everything back again. So David and his 600 soldiers set out to find the Amalekites. But when they reached the Besar ravine, they stopped. 200 soldiers were just too tired to go any farther. So David left them to rest and guard the supplies. A little farther on, David and his men found an Egyptian lying in the field, a slave to one of the Amalekites. He had been abandoned because of illness. He was weak from hunger and thirst. David and his men gave him some water and food, and then asked the man to help them find the Amalekites. So the Egyptian led David to the Amalekite camp. From a distance, they watched the Amalekites eating and drinking, celebrating their victory. David and his men attacked the Amalekites at sunset. The battle lasted all night and the next day. When it was over, the Amalekites were defeated. Only 400 men escaped on their camels. David and his men rescued everything and every person that had been stolen from Ziklag. David and the soldiers collected their families, their possessions, and their animals. They gathered things that they had captured from the Amalekites and began the long walk home. As they neared Besar ravine, the 200 men who had stayed behind came out to meet them. But some of David's weary soldiers were not glad to see how rested their friends looked. We'll give these men back their wives and their children, they grumbled, but nothing else. They didn't help us win, so they shouldn't share the goods. Wait, David said. Who won this battle? We didn't win. The Lord did. He gave us this victory. He protected us. So all will share alike. And that's the good news of God's grace. When God wins the battle, He shares the victory. We are all winners because Jesus won the victory over sin and Satan. a beautiful house. The message for this week is, I worship God when I show respect and reverence for His house. The memory verse is from Psalm 84, verse 1. How lovely is your dwelling place, O Lord Almighty. Come, daughter, said Vamala's mother. We will go see the most beautiful place in India, the Taj Mahal. The Taj Mahal was beautiful. However, it was not as beautiful as the house Solomon built for God. King Solomon sent for a servant. It's time to begin building God's house, he announced. I've given a lot of thought to this project, and now it's time to start. All the Israelites knew about this wonderful plan. King David, Solomon's father, had wanted to build a special house for God, but God told him no. David's son, the next king, would build the temple. Now King David was dead, and Solomon had been the king of Israel for 4 years, and he was finally ready to begin building the temple. I want to send a letter to Hiram, the king of Tyre, Solomon said. He paced up and down the room. Finally, he began to say what he wanted to write to Hiram. You were a good friend of my father, David, Solomon began. He was not able to build a temple to honor the Lord as he wanted to. Now I am going to do it. Please cut tall cedar trees from your mountains for me. I will send men to help your servants with the work, and I will pay whatever you ask. King Hiram was pleased to receive Solomon's letter. He sent word that he would indeed provide lumber for the temple, and he promised to send Haram-Abi, a great artist, to help Solomon's workers. Haram-Abi knew how to work with gold and silver and bronze and wood. He also knew all about stonework and carpentry. He also could teach about weaving and dyeing beautiful fabrics. It took thousands of people to work on the huge temple project. King Solomon sent 30,000 men to King Hiram to help cut down trees and bring them home. 80,000 other men cut beautiful stone out of the mountainsides and shaped them into blocks. When taken to the temple, the blocks fit together like pieces in a puzzle. There was no sound of hammers or axes or any iron tools at the building site. This was one way the workers showed reverence for the Lord. Solomon's temple was probably the most beautiful building ever built on the earth at the time. On the inside, the stone walls were completely covered with wood. The wood was decorated with carvings of angels, palm trees, and flowers. And then it was completely covered with gold. Even the floor and the ceiling were covered in gold. Artists carved 2 great angels from olive wood. They overlaid the angels with gold too. The angels were placed in the most holy place where the Ark of God would rest. Their lovely wings stretched across the entire room. All of the furniture in the temple was beautiful and carefully made as possible. The Israelites wanted to honor the Lord in the very best way. Who can really build the Lord a worthy home? Solomon asked. Not even the highest heaven can contain him. Building and taking care of a church are acts of worship for us, just as they were when Solomon built God's beautiful temple. And the things we do and say inside our church are also to be acts of worship. For all people. The message for this week is, I worship God with my worldwide church family. The memory verse is from Revelation chapter 15, verse 4. All nations will come and worship before you. Have you ever had a special guest come to your church? Was that person a well-known preacher or singer? The Israelites invited an extra special guest to their new church, God. He even promised to live in their temple. Solomon's eyes sparkled. It was finished. All the furniture was in the right place. Every detail was complete. It was time now to dedicate the temple to the Lord. Solomon called the leaders of all the tribes and families of Israel to come to Jerusalem. The first part of the dedication involved bringing the ark to its new home in the temple. Everyone watched as the priests, they carried it slowly with great respect and joy to the temple. King Solomon and the people sacrificed sheep and oxen along the way. In their joy, they sacrificed so many sheep and oxen to the Lord that no one could keep count. The priests carried the ark containing the law of God into the most holy place of the temple. They set it carefully beneath the wings of the two great carved golden-covered angels. Then all the Levites, who were musicians, stood near the altar playing their instruments, cymbals and harps and lyres. The musicians sang and played loudly and powerfully together. They praised and thanked the Lord. He is so good, they sang. His faithful love endures forever. At that moment, the most amazing thing happened. A great cloud filled the temple. The cloud held the glorious presence of the Lord. The priests could not continue their work. They had to leave the temple because of God's glory. Solomon saw the cloud and his heart swelled with thankfulness. The temple was finished and the Lord had moved in. He turned around and looked at all the Israelites standing before him. "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel," he shouted. Then Solomon knelt down. He lifted his hands toward heaven in front of all the people. He began to pray. "O Lord, God of Israel, there is no God like you in all of heaven or earth. You keep your promises and show unfailing love to all who obey you. May you watch over this temple both day and night. May you always hear the prayers I make towards this place. If your people are ever defeated by their enemies because they have sinned against you, and if they turn to you and call on your name and pray to you here in this temple, then hear from heaven and forgive their sins. Forgive your people who have sinned against you, for they are your people, your special possession, whom you brought out of Egypt." When Solomon finished praying, he stood up and shouted a blessing over all the people of Israel. "May the Lord our God be with us, as he was with our ancestors. May he give us the desire to obey his commands. May people all over the earth know that the Lord is God." Then the king and all the children of Israel offered sacrifices to the Lord. Solomon and the Israelites celebrated together for 14 days. No one would ever forget it. They would tell it over and over again. Finally, someone would write down the story so people could read it forever.
This podcast is read by Frenita Buddy for Gracelink.net. Created and produced by Falvo Fowler. Post-produced by Faith Toe at Studio Elpizo. The theme music is by Clayton Kinney. Animation and artwork by Diogo Godoy. The audio engineer was Karel Holness. For more information, please visit Gracelink.net.